Welcome to Building Teams with Teams & Co., where we explore how leaders can empower their teams, achieve ambitious strategies, and deliver an exceptional customer experience. Views expressed by guests are their own and may not reflect the views of Teams & Co. Mention of particular products or services and participation of a guest does not imply an endorsement by Teams & Co. The information provided is for educational and entertainment purposes and should not be taken as professional advice.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're listening to this. Hope that you're having a fantastic day. My name is Mike Vagalis, and you're listening to the Building Teams with Teams & Co. podcast. Tracy wasn't able to make it today, so we know that Tracy's doing great things out in a client meeting right now. But I have the great privilege of talking to a very close friend of mine, Kaleb Hupp. And Kaleb, how are you doing this morning? Welcome into the podcast.
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, really appreciate you joining today. For everybody that's listening, Kaleb and I got to be good friends in business school. You'll see me wearing my Northwestern Kellogg shirt in honor of this podcast. So really excited to talk with one of my best friends, one of the best leaders that I know, and to learn from Kaleb and his experience. So Kaleb, before we jump into more of the business side of things, serious things. It's summer. You're living in the great city of Cleveland. What do you got going on this summer? How's it been for you so far this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. This summer, man, it's crazy to believe that it's already June. The year's almost half over. I feel like it just got started. It's been a kind of a interesting past, 15 months, I think, for everybody since the onset of the pandemic. So, my wife, Heather, and I are really excited to get back out there and enjoy ourselves a little bit more this year than maybe we were able to last year due to the shutdowns and everything. So, as Mike just said, I'm joining you all from Cleveland, Ohio. So tonight we're going to an Indians game. We're looking forward to that. But yeah, as far as other stuff going on this summer, we don't have any major plans. We had our wedding on May 1st, as Mike knows.
Yeah.
He was there with us celebrating the big day. So a lot of our time and energy went into planning the wedding. And now that that's over, calendar's semi-empty for the rest of the summer. Got a couple races and endurance events coming up that are taking a lot of my free time to train for that. But other than that, yeah, just working away and trying to enjoy the summer.
Yeah. And so Kaleb is one of these people that is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to him today, and we'll get into this a little bit more. But Kaleb has this awesome ability to focus and really dedicate himself to multiple things, being a great friend, a great husband, a tremendous professional, and then also just doing crazy things like running Ironman races. So I know you've got a couple of those coming up. When are those this year?
I got one this weekend in Des Moines, and don't let Mike fool you. I do participate in these activities, but I am not good at them by any stretch of the imagination. I am a very mediocre to below average triathlete, probably way below average, honestly. But I just do it as something to, keep me active, keep me healthy, and try to stay focused.
Yeah.
I got one coming up this weekend in Des Moines, my hometown, and then one later this fall in Muncie, Indiana.
The sprawling metropolis of Muncie.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's funny. I've been there a couple times, and for these races, and every hotel in the entire surrounding 20-mile radius is sold out. I don't know that the sprawling metropolis of Muncie is really prepared from an infrastructure standpoint to have so many people coming in all at once.
Sounds like Muncie could engage in some strategic planning, maybe with Teams & Co. One funny story, and then Kaleb, we're really excited to hop into your background. When we were in business school together, there was one day where Kaleb was training for, I think, an Ironman, maybe a marathon. I don't know. And we were sitting in class, and I think it was a finance class. And Kaleb leans over and is like, "Hey, I'm going for a run after class. Do you want to join?" And I sort of naively said, "Yeah, sure. I'm up for a run." and come to find out that his training run that day was like 12 miles. And up until that point, I had not been a 12-mile run sort of person. So Kaleb took me out and kept things sort of at my pace, and we did the run, and then I proceeded to collapse for about half an hour. And then we went out for pizza, and it ended up being a great night. And I felt really good that I was able to to get out there and go with you. So
yeah. Well,
yeah,
it was a fun day.
Fun times.
I don't know that you'd ever ran that far, had you?
That was my first time. That was my first. And then later, he convinced me to run a marathon with him. So we ran a marathon together a couple of years ago. And then from there, he's now trying to convince me to do an Ironman or some sort of triathlon. So we'll see if you guys hear me training for one of those at some point, you'll know the culprit. Cool. Well, Kaleb, let's hop a little bit more into your background. Want to start really in your decision to join the Army. And I know you've had some unbelievable experiences with the Army, some really, really great and positive, and some really difficult. So I want to just turn it over to you. Can you walk us through first your decision to serve, and then second, what that experience was like, and what were some of the big things that you learned that you've taken with you from your time in the Army?
Yeah, interesting question. So I have some military background in my family. My mother actually retired from the Iowa National Guard after 40 years of service. So I kind of grew up around the military, although I never really thought that was the path for me until I graduated high school and started college at the University of Iowa. At that time, our country was pretty deep into major conflicts in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and that as that was unfolding, it just led me to reconsider and think about what I could do to. It was hard for me to kind of just stand back and watch other people going to fight for our country, and it just seemed like a great opportunity that I could participate in. So, a little bit of it is because of the military history in my family. A little bit of it is, from this greater sense of duty, but there's a huge portion of it that was self-serving as well. I took out that first student loan as an undergrad, and that was more money than I'd ever even seen in one place. And, so thinking about how I could get my college education funded while maybe going on an adventure of a lifetime for a few years, that really resonated with me too. So when I added all those things together, I decided to join the ROTC program at the University of Iowa. And that's kind of what fueled my decision to join the military.
Yeah.
I had great experience. I ended up serving as an infantry officer in the Army for 5 years. And it was a wonderful decision for many, many reasons. I really look back fondly on my time in the Army. But at the end of the day, I just decided it wasn't a career that I wanted to stick with forever.
Yeah. So walk us through, what does that mean to be an infantry officer serving over in the Middle East? What sort of leadership role did you have, and what just generally were the day-to-day activities that you did when you were serving?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I mentioned I was in for 5 years as an infantry officer, and the first full year of that was pretty much just spent in various training courses. So my first year I was in Georgia, and I went through infantry officer school, and that's just where you learn. To answer your previous question, what does it even mean to be an infantry officer? So you start out as a platoon leader, which is you have 39 soldiers in your platoon in a standard infantry platoon, and the infantry, for those who aren't familiar, are ground foot soldiers of the Army. So as a brand new infantry officer, you start out as a platoon leader. Hopefully, if you're lucky, that's the coveted role that everybody's jockeying for. There's some competition, but at some point you'll be a platoon leader. If you're an infantry officer, you got 39 soldiers in your platoon, and it's your job to lead them on a day-to-day basis. So anyways, yeah, my first full year was spent going through various schools, infantry officer school being one, airborne school where you learn how to jump out of planes, ranger school, which is kind of the Army's small unit tactics training school, and some other various courses along the way. From there, I was stationed in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is just, maybe an hour outside of Nashville, for the next 4 years, although for 2 of those I was in Afghanistan, or for the better part of 2 of those years I was in Afghanistan. And that was, really interesting, really eye-opening, got to see a whole different part of the world, and presented some interesting challenges and opportunities. On my first deployment, we were partnered up with a Afghan police unit, and our whole mission or goal was to coach their officers, their leadership, on basically just running a more effective organization, or trying to share some of the principles that we use in our own military, to coach them to be more self-sufficient, self-sustaining, and hopefully stand up for themselves and secure their district against the Taliban better. So that was the whole goal of my first deployment, and second deployment too. Really, they were just slightly different.
Okay, so let me get this right. So you're stepping out of college, fresh college graduate. You go into basically like an Army pressure cooker where they teach you a whole bunch of stuff. And then you come out on the other end, and you, as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, you're in charge of 39 other soldiers. Question 1, what are they teaching in that pressure cooker to put you in a position where you felt confident being in charge of 39 other people? And then second, how do you go about winning the trust and respect and confidence of your team?
Good questions. I'll start with the second one of building, trust and within your teams. I think one of the most important things that I learned, and that I tried to live by as an officer, is just recognizing that you are the 22-year-old. Maybe you finished college and you went through these big fancy Army schools, but there's a lot of soldiers in your platoon who have 10, 12, 15 years of experience, and they know a lot more about what being in the Army means. For most of them know a lot more about what being in combat means than you do at that point. So I think that the biggest thing for me was just to rely on the experience of the team members that you have, that you're fortunate to learn from, or recognize that you don't know everything. In fact, you don't know a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You don't need to know everything. It's okay to admit when you don't know, and to really rely on the experience and expertise of your teams.
And I'm sure that they respected that as well. You being humble enough to recognize, I don't know, I need to learn from your experience. Yeah. How did they respond when you approached them with that degree of humility?
I think pretty much everybody would appreciate being treated in that way, having their leader admitting and recognizing that they don't know everything, and they need the input from the team to really make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fortunately, as really at every level of being an officer in the military, you're partnered with a non-commissioned officer who has more experience than you. And you're responsible for slightly different things, but for, using my example of leading a platoon, you have a platoon leader who's a young second lieutenant, and then you have a platoon sergeant who's somebody who's been in the Army probably anywhere from 7 to 15 years at
Sure.
that point. So that's really kind of your your go-to person in the platoon, and it's kind of like a marriage where, you got to be on the same playing field as your platoon sergeant to really make things work. Mom and dad can fight behind closed doors, but in front of the platoon, it should be a unified front. And really how well you two work together can really be a big determinant on how successful your organization is. And that's true for, as I mentioned, every level of leadership. As you progress throughout the military, you have that non-commissioned officer counterpart.
Yeah.
Which is hugely important.
Yeah. So what was some of the training that they put you through in those schools? Did they teach you some of these principles, like how to work with an NCO really effectively, how to lead soldiers in combat? What were those things that they taught you?
Yeah, so a lot of the principles that you learn, like through ROTC or whatever your commissioning source is, the three most common, or really the only three that I know of, are Officer Candidate School or ROTC, or a military academy like West Point. And a lot of like the leadership principles and stuff, and some of the academia you learn in your commissioning source, as well as just some of the basics and fundamentals of how to put on a uniform, how to march around, how to do a salute, what the rank structure is, all of that. So you got to know just the basics of the organization, how to fit into this big machine, and some of the leadership principles from there, like how to write an order, an operations order, how to do some of that strategic planning and tactical planning and small unit tactics. So you learn a lot of that stuff, but it's not really until you get to your branch specific schools, like for me, infantry officer school and then ranger school, where I feel like you're really putting a lot of those things to the test. And what I would attribute the success to of those types of schools for preparing you to be a leader is they force you to do it. You're not just learning about it in a textbook. You're running missions that are simulated combat missions, and you rotate through who's the platoon leader for this mission, who's the squad leader, which, a platoon is made up of 4 squads generally. So, you rotate through all these different positions. So you kind of get a sense for what it's like to be the soldier who's carrying the heavy machine gun on the mission, to the squad leader who's managing, the efforts of 9 soldiers, to what it's like to be the platoon leader who's managing the efforts for all 39 soldiers. So you get a lot of practice and experience going through that, through the training courses that way. A couple things, Ranger School, I think, was the biggest. I learned a lot. I learned the most in that school than any other. But most importantly, I think, I learned more about myself, and I think that's what one of the biggest outcomes of that school is. I think you do learn some good leadership principles, but I think you also you learn that the human body and mind are capable of a lot more than you thought they were. Going into it, which I think also helps prepare you for tougher situations down the road when you're in combat, or in a tough business situation, or training for a marathon, or whatever the case may be. I would have never fathomed that the human body can walk for 10 or 12 miles after having 30 minutes of sleep over the prior 48 hours, but that's the type of stuff that you're doing in Ranger School. And when you come out on the other end of it, you realize that, I can do a lot more than I ever even thought was possible. And I just think that, that's important for, enduring hardships for the rest of your life.
Yeah. What I hear come through there is something that we talk about a lot, which is, before we talked about this sense of like genuine humility that you had working with officers who are more experienced than you, and you coming and, being humble enough to say, hey, I don't have experience in this topic area. I need the team. But then what you just talked about, which I think is the other counterpoint, is you need to have this sense of real, authentic confidence. And you going through those different experiences, learning and gaining not a cockiness or something that's unearned, but a very real and earned sense of confidence. So you were able to step into that role, even as a young leader, and say, yeah, I'm humble in the areas where I need to be humble, but I also have this deeply rooted sense of confidence in my abilities, and I've been put to the test, and I'm confident coming out that you can, fulfill the mission that you had at hand. Would that be an accurate sort of representation?
Yeah, I think so. And to your point, it is important, and one of the principles that you're taught and what you're graded on is being able to project that confidence. So, I mentioned it's okay to admit when you don't know things, or seek out the opinions of others. Yeah, I mean, that's all hugely important. But when it comes time to brief your plan, your operations order that you came up with, you got to deliver that confidently in order to instill the confidence in the soldiers. And that obviously carries over to business as well. Everybody wants to follow a leader who they at least think knows what they're doing. So, I guess to that point, I think it's super important to gather the input and experience of others when formulating the plan. When it comes time to execute the plan and deliver the plan, I think it's important to, really own it at that point and execute it with confidence.
Yeah, let's dig into that planning process a little bit more, and maybe within the context of, it's such an interesting mission that you had, training up really a police force from a completely different context across the world that is in a very different culture and experience. How did you go about developing the plan to fulfill the mission?
So I'll start off by sharing something that I think is an important part of the Army's strategic planning process, which is every time that there's an order, or every time you're planning a mission, you need to plan it within what they call the commander's intent from 2 levels above you. So for me, if I'm a platoon leader, then 2 levels above me would be my company commander and then battalion commander. So that's, 2 officer groups above me, or 2 organizational levels above me, I guess would be a better way to say it. And I think that's important, to make sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction. And that's kind of how you keep a big organization moving in the same direction. So my battalion commander was operating 2 levels above him, to his brigade commander and division commander. So these are, I think that's a super important concept of just nested mission planning to make sure that everybody's moving in the same direction as I mentioned. So, and then another important concept that we always used with mission planning was backwards planning. And a lot of these things seem pretty basic, but it's easy to forget some of the most basic principles when faced with maybe like a new business problem, how to even think about it. So, we always start with backwards planning. What is the overall objective that we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
And therefore, what are the ways, what all needs to take place in order to make that happen?
And that's something that we talk about a lot as well. And I think that nested mission is a great term that I haven't heard before, but it's really similar in principle to something that we talk about at Teams & Co. a lot. And when we work with our clients and we're going through something like a strategic planning process, which you even use that terminology, and starting with, first and foremost, understanding in the business context, who's the customer and what does, we equate organizational success as delivering value for that customer. So by understanding who's the customer and then understanding how does our organization within our competitive context deliver value to that customer is fundamental. And from there, for organizations understanding, okay, well, what role does my business unit contribute to the overall success of my organization. And then from there, rolling that down to what's my individual role and what's the role of my team in contributing to that overall organizational value. And in that way, within a business context, every person should be able to understand what's my role in delivering value ultimately to the customer. And even if you're in a back office function that isn't directly interacting with customers, like if you listen to our interview with Brett Hampson, he talks about that, where he's in a back office finance team. And ultimately, if they do their jobs well, they're able to control costs and drive efficiencies in the organization, which results in a better customer experience by driving prices down, which is a huge that's a major purchase decision for customers and impacts the customer experience. So Kaleb, I think what you're talking about has some direct applicability to the business realm. And I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about your military experience. And I know you and I have had so many conversations there, and there's such great translations, like we just talked about, setting up a strategic or a tactical military plan and how that carries over to the business world. So just sort of recognizing time, I'd love to spend more time talking about your experiences in the military, but would love to bridge over to your business experiences. Can you talk about walking out of the Army? Maybe what were some of the big things that you said, I'm going to carry these with me for the rest of my life? And then can you just give a sketch of what your life has been like since leaving the military?
Yeah. For a number of reasons, I decided to get out of the Army. Like I mentioned, it was an awesome experience. I really loved it. I look back fondly on it, but I was gone a lot, and I reckon it's important to me at some point to have a family of my own. So that was probably the biggest reason for me leaving the military, which plenty of people are successful in having a wonderful family life that do choose to stay in as a career. For me, I thought, it would be super important for me at some point when I'm a dad to be at the soccer games and parent-teacher conferences and stuff like that. So that was my biggest driver for leaving the military. But then there was this question of what the heck am I going to do with myself from here? So I was fortunate. I went through kind of a headhunter organization that does job placement, matches up companies who are looking to hire junior military officers separating from service and those officers who are separating. So I was very fortunate. I had a bunch of opportunities at a number of really good companies, but it was really just a matter of deciding what I wanted to do. I decided to join a management consulting firm in their downtown Chicago office. And for me, I guess the biggest reason for that was, I spent the past 5 years in the military. If I compare myself to peers that are that I graduated college with, they have 5 years of business experience that I missed out on. Yeah, I had all this other great experience, but it wasn't business experience. Mm-hmm. So I thought management consulting would be a really good way for me to get a lot of business experience in a really condensed amount of time.
Yeah.
So I spent the next 4 years doing management consulting, and a lot of the projects that we focused on were growth strategy. So how does company X grow their top line revenues? Generally speaking, at a high level, was the type of business problems that we were helping companies try to solve. And there's a bunch of different levers that you can pull. And our job was to try and help figure out which of the levers would be the most impactful to pull at which times. If I could summarize my 4 years of consulting in a couple sentences, I would say that was the types of business problems we were solving. But my passion has always been in finance and personal finance, and so after I left consulting, I had an opportunity to join one of my best friends from my time in the military. We actually went through Ranger School together and would talk about personal finance stuff through sleepless nights in the Georgia mountains and swamps. No, I don't think we were talking about much finance stuff then. We were just trying to stay alive. But anyways, point being, he was a successful financial planner before joining the military, did his stint in the military, and then came back to personal financial planning. And the stars just happened to align where his business partner of many years was retiring. He needed somebody to come in and help serve the clients that they'd already been working with for many years. And yeah, that was just a really kind of great opportunity that just so happened to line up, and I couldn't be happier. So that's what led me to Cleveland. And so now we're we're franchise owners of an Ameriprise financial practice. Our practice, Rally Point Wealth Management, with a little nod to our military service. But obviously it's a completely different world than management consulting or what we were both doing in the military.
Yeah.
So additional background on how I got to where I am today.
Yeah. So Kaleb, looking at sort of your career, you've had 3 distinct chapters of your career. One as an Army officer, as a management consultant, and now as an entrepreneur, a business owner, where you're focused on setting the strategy and executing that strategy for your own customers. Can you just walk us through, are there any distinct common threads that sort of weave between those 3 career chapters? Maybe just in terms of how you approach work, or how do you approach the job in each of those roles, and then maybe what are some major differences between those as well?
Yeah, so I definitely think there are common threads. And some of the principles that we've already discussed I've just witnessed them carry through all of these, what the ideas of like nested mission statements and principles like that. I mean, that obviously works in backwards planning. That same can be said for management consulting. I already described how that was kind of applicable in the Army, but in management consulting, one of the phrases that you'll hear a lot is boiling the ocean.
Yeah.
So it's really easy when you're presented with a mountain of data and number. There's so many different questions that you could find yourself really going down a rabbit hole on trying to boil the ocean. So I really think that, having a good plan in place to always remember what's the objective that we're trying to solve for here, and what are the steps that I need to take in order to solve it. Of course, sometimes the plan changes and now you are going to solve for a different question that you originally intended for, but that should be a thoughtful and deliberate choice at that point, not just because you got sidetracked on something and ended up spending 2 weeks out of your 6-week project trying to answer a question that ultimately isn't going to be impactful for the client that you're trying to help. So I guess that's an example of how I saw backwards planning and, keeping the objective in mind and keeping your commander's intent from 2 levels above you in mind at all times as well.
Nice.
And then, I think the same thing is true for our own, our practice here that my partner and I run. It's clearly such a completely different level of organization than some of the Fortune 500 companies that I was doing consulting projects for, or the Army, which is a huge organization. So there's a lot less bureaucracy, we're able to be a lot more nimble and make decisions kind of on the fly for how we want to run the practice. But ultimately, again, it's easy to, if you're not constantly focused on what your overall objective is, which for us as the owners of the business is to provide an excellent client experience and provide excellent service to our clients, then it's easy to get caught up in the some of the minutia of some of the planning and preparation and stuff like that can go into serving our clients. You got to keep the big picture in mind, of how we're constantly looking for how can we provide the best service to our clients.
That's great. So let's
just what I was going to say for type of like business planning and strategy for us, it's nice because my partner and I do have a lot of say over how we run the practice and our internal processes and procedures and stuff. But, it all starts with coming up with defining what that common objective is. I already said providing excellent service to our clients is number one, but, then what do we want our practice to look like? There's a lot of decision making that goes into that. Do we want to grow extremely rapidly and 10 years from now, maybe have 10 more advisors on our staff or 20 more advisors on our staff and, serving a much larger client base? Or do we want to keep it smaller and tighter knit like it is right now? Those are all the types of questions that we have to wrestle with. But it's important that, we're on the same page with defining what our overall objective is. And, it's constantly a moving target.
Yeah. I'd love to dig into that just a little bit more. So how do you and Zach think through some of those questions? Maybe first starting with the customer. What does a tremendous customer experience look like? How do you deliver that maybe in unique ways in your industry, in a way that helps you guys separate yourself from the pack and differentiate? I'd love to just anchor back to, if we say organizational success equals driving a superior customer experience or customer value, how do you guys think through that?
Really just trying to put ourselves in the customer's shoes or our client's shoes. We keeping the end in mind again. I think it's always important for us to, like you're saying, define what does success look like. And for me, I started out as a client before I joined as a partner working here. So I've seen it from both sides now. But I think just keeping in perspective, we want our clients to come away from our planning meetings with them feeling more confident and feeling like they have a plan in place, and really being grateful that they received excellent advice.
Yeah. Gosh, I was going to ask something. I totally. What else do you want to focus on in this part of the conversation?
So I'm not sure where this could fit in, but one of the notes that I had jotted down that I think is like a cool lesson that we were always that was drilled into us in the military was put yourself where you can best control your element. Identifying as a leader where you should be to best lead the organization.
Do you have a way that you apply that in your Ameriprise practice?
In consulting, for example, I guess like for the Army example, it's when I thought about myself as an infantry officer, I thought about like, I want to be the guy kicking down doors. I want to be the first one in the building because that's what you see on the TV and action movies, and that looks like the high adrenaline or the highest risk part of the mission. That's the stuff that I want to do. And in reality, as an officer or somebody who's in control of that element, it's probably not where you can best control your whole organization. If you're the first person in the door and there's 38 people scattered out across the objective in different positions, now you're
less able to control
the flow of the rest of the operation, and then how that would relate into management consulting is like, it could be easy if you're a project manager, like, oh man, these PowerPoint slides don't look as nice as I want them to or think they should. I'm just going to focus on fixing them myself. Well, now you're taking your precious hours away of higher level project management type skills, and you're fixing PowerPoint slides, and what are all the things that are going on that you're not doing at that point. So I think that's just a good management principle to always keep in mind is constantly asking yourself, where can I put myself to best influence the rest of my team?
I love that. Hey, Claire, can we just keep that, everything that Kaleb just said? So, Kaleb, as you think about some of the big picture things that you learned in the Army, and as you look to take those into first your career as a consultant for 4 years working with clients, and then now as a business owner, what's maybe one thing, if you've got one thing that you would say is sort of applicable and that you've been able to use from your experience in the Army, maybe in a different way in some of these different, more corporate settings?
One of the leadership principles that we didn't touch on yet that I thought was just a really great lesson that I learned in the Army was to put yourself where you're in best control of your element. So how that relates to the Army, I was thinking, going into this thing, I'm going to be an infantry officer. I want to be the one kicking down the doors because that looks like it's the most exciting and it's dangerous and you should lead from the front. And, I agree, you should lead from the front. But, if you're the one who's always kicking down the doors as a platoon leader, for example, there's the rest of your element that you're not directing and controlling at that point. So I learned very quickly that although it looks cool in the movies, and you want to be the tough person kicking down the doors, as an officer, that's probably not where you're going to best control your element. So how I would say that relates to something like management consulting. If you're managing a project and you have a team of analysts helping you on this project, and it can be easy to get bogged down in things like, hey, these PowerPoint slides for this presentation aren't really looking as nice as I want them to. I'll just fix them myself. Well, you've just removed yourself from the point where you could better control your element, and you got bogged down doing spending a bunch of your own precious hours fixing these slides, which is important. I don't argue that, but there's, you gotta always think about what are all the things that you're not doing by taking yourself out of a position to better direct the efforts of others. So not sure if that's what you were looking for, but I think that, that is one good leadership principle that I learned in the military that I think is applicable to all businesses as well.
I think it's great. I think we've talked through so many wonderful things that I think are pretty universal. One is, we talked about sort of the how of leadership and this idea of confident humility, where you can be genuinely, authentically confident in your abilities and your skill sets, but also humble. We've talked about the idea of a nested mission, where you understand what's the overall organizational objective and how do I direct the efforts of myself and my team within that broader organizational context. And then, okay, really tactically, how do you do that? I mean, this sort of gets back to the idea that of just driving role clarity. And, we often use the RACI tool, which I know you're familiar with, Kaleb, but just defining who's responsible and accountable for what. And as a leader, being thoughtful and deliberate in where is your role in the organization, and how can you put yourself in the best position to serve as a leader and direct the rest of your team to direct the overall project forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the leader shouldn't be willing to dive in and get their hands dirty and do some of the, help fix the PowerPoint slides if it's crunch time, and maybe that is the best place that you can be to help support your team at that moment. Maybe it is time for that. So I'm not saying that maybe as an officer, you might find yourself in a situation where it's applicable that you're the one kicking down the door. I think as a leader, you have to be willing to get your hands dirty and do the work, not just delegating everything out all the time. But just, again, as long as that's a thoughtful and deliberate decision that you're making.
Yeah. And you do that a lot now, right? Where you and your business partner are in all the big strategic conversations. You're driving the strategy of your organization, but you're also the one executing it and working with clients and setting up financial plans and helping them, coaching and advising them on a daily basis to help achieve their objective, which ultimately is financial stability and utilizing their resources to the best of your ability to help them achieve the life goals that they have. So I think that there's this idea of the person that's in the strategic conversation oftentimes is also the person driving and executing as well, which again, you're doing in your daily job right now.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's a major difference between the role I'm in now and some of my previous experiences. There's a lot more of the individual contributor nature to my current job. But, I still think a lot of these same principles apply, because at the end of the day, we're trying to help people make good decisions with their money and for their own financial life. So, there is still some leadership, I guess, involved with that. It's just, it's different than managing a project team or leading a platoon in the Army. But you're right. I think a lot of the same principles apply.
Yeah. Oh man, well, Kaleb, this has been fantastic. I think that we've talked about so many things that ultimately are what we talk about a lot here at Teams & Co. and on this podcast. And we've used some, military terminology. We've used some corporate jargon and stuff as well, but just understanding overall, a lot of the principles remain the same, where you lead with authentic humility, you define role clarity, and ultimately you try to understand, what am I doing as an organization, and how do we best serve our customers? Kaleb, for anybody that's out there that's listening and understanding, hey, I'd love to work with a financial advisor that is a veteran, that has served our country, that thinks this deliberately and this thoughtfully about business in general, and understanding that they're going to, or that you seek to carry all those lessons forward for your customers, where can they find you?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you happen to be in the Cleveland, Ohio area, we have two offices, one in Westlake, Ohio, one in Hudson, Ohio. Most people probably are not in the Cleveland suburbs. But we work with a lot of clients remotely. And for that, I would say just Google us, or there's going to be a link provided with the podcast. The name of the practice is Rally Point Wealth Management, and we're a franchise of Ameriprise Financial. So, yeah, like I said, I'll make sure that you guys have the link to share with the podcast, but it's ameripriseadvisors.com/team/Rally Point Wealth Management.
Yeah. And we will be providing that in the link with this podcast. So be sure to go check out Kaleb. It's a great practice. They really do a great job of setting the customer first and seeking to understand what your goals and objectives are with your personal finances, and helping you to achieve those goals really thoughtfully and deliberately. And they're they operate with a lot of well-earned confidence. And yeah, so Caleb, any final thoughts that you would want to share with the listeners of the Building Teams podcast?
No, I mean, just, again, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat with you. It's always great catching up and talking about business stuff with you. It's just like the old days in Northwestern.
That's right. Go Cats. Well, Caleb, it's great having you. And I know that we've been a little bit long, but this is just such a great conversation and really appreciate you joining today. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
You've been listening to Building Teams with Teams & Co. To learn more about the latest thinking on how to empower your team to deliver exceptional results, or to book a consultation.
That's right. Go Cats.
Please visit us at teamsandco.com.
Well, Caleb, it's great having you. And
LinkedIn,
I know that we've
Twitter,
been a little bit long, but this is just such a great conversation and really appreciate you joining today. We'll talk to you soon.